Hello, I'm Mike Peckham, Treasurer and Board Member since February 2018. For those residents that attended the annual meeting, you heard me announce that the Board has approved the 2020 budgets, including a 10% increase in the LSCA assessment for 2020. The 10% increase amounts to $132.64 a year, $33.16 per quarter, or $11.05 approximately per month. I explained what contributed to this necessary increase in the assessment at the meeting, and the board thought it would be useful if we prepared this video for residents who were unable to attend the meeting and wanted to get a little bit of background from the treasurer's mouth regarding the reasons for the increase. By the way, there was no change in the assessments for Lesendis Mountain or for Windsong respectively, whose residents pay for these benefited area assessments in addition to the Lesendis assessment, which all residents pay. By way of background, Lesendis has three funds that it uses to account for different aspects of our operations. The operating fund covers day-to-day expenditures for things like landscape, administrative, gate operation, insurance, and other day-to-day expenses. The reserve fund is where we set aside funds for the repair and replacement of assets that have been either purchased or built by the association over the years in common areas and which we must maintain. These would include asphalt on the streets behind enclaves, fences, gates, buildings, playground equipment, and all the various amenities that we have here at Lesendis. These expenditures are often referred to as being capital in nature, as they're the upfront purchase and not the ongoing operation or maintenance. Final fund is the Capital Improvement Fund, which was created in 2015 for new capital expenditures to keep Lesendis vibrant and appealing, not only to our current residents, but for potential residents, new residents. Boulder Mountain Park Phase 1 is a prime example of what the capital improvement funds have been used to create. These expenditures are again similar to the reserve fund in that they're referred to as capital in nature, but they're strictly for the creation of new amenities, new assets that will ultimately be added to the reserve fund. Our annual assessment or dues are used to fund these three funds, and in 2020, our total revenues of approximately $5.2 million were allocated 65% to the operating fund, 30% to the reserve fund, and 5% to the capital improvement fund. So first, let's start with the reserve fund. As it was the major contributor to the assessment increase for 2020. Lesendis has a reserve study prepared every 2 years approximately. The study helps us determine the useful lives of assets, the estimated repair or replacement costs, and the remaining useful lives at any point in time, and when we should expect to either repair or replace those assets. In 2019, we did an on-site study, the first in 10 years. So there are two types of studies, an off-site where we provide information to the third-party experts that prepare our reserve fund study. We update them on any new acquisitions that were put into use or any repairs and replacements of current asset along with contributions throughout the year and any other revenue sources. An on-site review is recommended every 4 to 5 years, And we did that in 2019. We get much better information from an on-site study because a number of the personnel of this third-party company are on-site at Lucentis to actually look at the current status of all of the assets that are included in the reserve study. So they spent approximately 8 to 10 man days walking around the property, looking at the status of our roads, our landscape, our irrigation systems, our buildings, our amenities, every single asset, as I mentioned. What they found was that some of the estimates that we had used did not prove to be accurate at this point in time. And particularly, we found that a number of our roads had deteriorated faster than anticipated. And therefore, the useful life wasn't as long as we anticipated. What that means is that ultimately certain expenditures to replace or repair the roads would be accelerated, and we weren't funded to the level we thought we were. Another thing that comes out of those studies are the suggested contributions to the reserve fund to achieve the goals we have over a 30-year period. And our revised goal is to have our reserve fund 70% funded so that we have sufficient funds to make sure that all assets can be replaced when they need to be, and there is little risk of requiring a special assessment to bring cash in quickly to cover expenditures where we might have a shortfall. What this did was the recommended contribution for 2020 was up approximately 23% from the prior year to 1.56 million. And this in large part required an increase in the assessment to be able to accommodate that. Again, I mentioned that this set of contributions over the 30 years is to achieve that set of goals we have for the reserve fund, which we feel are reasonable. We'll continue to do our reserve funds every 2 years to have another look at the assets and revise the study, which could affect the contributions going forward. Next is the CIF fund, which was set up in 2015 with a 5% increase in the assessments at that time. The board has the ability to use a portion of the CIF assessment for operations as deemed necessary by the board. And this was the case in 2018 and 2019. So for 2020, we've returned to the allocation to the CIF of approximately 5%, or a dollar figure of $213,000. And this is up about $50,000 from the previous year, so that also put pressure on the assessments to increase them. Not to the same extent as the reserve fund, but still contributed. The board has identified a number of potential projects to be funded from the capital fund over the next several years, and we're still working on finalizing those and the timing of when we might move forward with those projects as well. Lastly, there's the operating fund. We've budgeted an increase of approximately 5% over 2019 in our operating expenditures. Some of this is for landscape water, where we had discontinued watering certain parts of the boulevard landscape, and based on the most recent assessments, we need to go back and put that watering back on. Our operating budgets are developed from the bottom up and include a number of estimates and assumptions, including a contingency for unforeseen expenses. And we've always used that contingency. This year we've budgeted $50,000. Now, wherever if we're able to underrun our budgeted expenses and essentially end up with a surplus under fund accounting, we can roll that into the next year, which again should relieve any pressure on future assessment increases. We manage these expenditures very closely, along with CCMC, our management company, and we strive to optimize our expenditures at all times. So the conclusion is that no one particularly looks forward to an increase in assessments. We all live here. We understand that it's always on our minds, certainly from a board perspective, to make sure we're spending the money correctly and that we don't go asking residents for anything more than we need to maintain this community in the very enviable status, I think, as a premier master planned community. Having a desirable community to live in like Las Sendas not only provides enjoyment to our residents, but also contributes to supporting the value of all of our homes. We want Las Sendas to remain competitive and continue to outperform other communities in the East Valley. A copy of the Treasurer's annual meeting presentation, my presentation that was given at the annual meeting, is on the Las Sendas website. If you need additional information or you'd like to see it. If you have any questions, please feel free to reach out to me directly or through the Trailhead office. Again, we appreciate your support and we look forward to continuing the very positive trend we see at Las Sendas into the future. Thank you.